Hello, welcome back to the grid layout slash a tile-based game. So as you can see here, this is picking up from the previous conversation that we had about setting up these JButtons in an 8x8 grid layout. So what we can also do is sometimes we want to be able to alter, the icons for the tiles. So if you're thinking in terms like other games, right? You've got a car here, so maybe you're doing like chess, right? Chess has more than one piece, not just a queen, for example. And so you could definitely set those images up. What I've done is, so you can use the constructor. I want to remind you to create a tile object. You can pass in, right? You can pass in uh, the name of the file. However, if you want to do a couple of the elements on the screen, where you don't want to have to use a for loop to kind of set those images, I added a helper method called setImage for a tile object. So now if we just go to the tile class, if we just scroll down to setImage, all it's doing is it's setting what image one is pointing to, and then it's setting the icon to image one. Essentially, I'm trying to abstract out the idea of using this part right here. Technically speaking, you could use that instead of calling the set image. All right, so that's that. I wanted to show you another thing that I added in this helper method, which is this idea of swapping. So for example, what if I wanted to swap this one with this one with this one, right? So if you want, let's say you had a memory game would work out with this. Tic-tac-toe, checkers, chess. I don't know. I guess technically you could do like Sudoku or something. The dog snoring. Um, so that's that. So I didn't want you to focus too much on this idea of swapping, but what we're doing here is all I'm actually doing is I'm taking every single property of the objects. So let's say we're, swapping these two. Both of these are objects, and those objects have properties, right? They just have a list of properties. And the idea of swapping is just swapping the two properties between the two objects. And that's what I've done for you. So if you go to the tile class one more time and you go to swap, so that's where you want to do all that jazz. Now, what you also want to do is if you ever add anything to the tile class, or let's say that you end up using this starter project, right? Instead of a tile, let's say you've got different type of tiles if you're doing chess, so like a queen, a king, a bishop, a rook, etc., right? What you want to do is you really want to extend this class. And so when you extend it, you're going to add additional features, right? You're going to add additional properties. And so you just want to make sure that your swapping still works out, because as you can see, this is just accessing all those instance variables, right? And it's just swapping between one tile and the other tile. So one of the tiles is called second. The other one is the current object you're inside of. So anything dealing with this keyword. So all of these over here, technically speaking, you can use a this keyword. In fact, maybe you should use a this keyword if you're confusing what the two objects are that you're like swapping between, right? So the first object is the one referred to as this. You're inside of that object. The other object is the one being passed in as a parameter for the swap object. So let's say you're pretending you're the object, you're swapping your properties with the other tile. Okay, so now let's talk about the mouse click commands. Um, let's see. So in terms of the mouse click, right, we want to be able to click on them and then we want them to respond. But we also wanna know like what we're clicking on. So we're gonna add a mouse listener. This entire class, of course, implements a mouse listener. So if you scroll all the way down here, you can see that we've got all these events, right? These events are triggered anytime we click on those tile objects, because again, we added the mouse listener to the tile objects. If you go to mouse click, this is where the mouse events argument, so the parameter here, actually also includes information about the component that that was clicked. And so we can actually grab that using this line of code. We are casting it as a tile because remember Java is kind of treating it like some generic object. But we as the programmers are like, well, I'm the one who created the 2D array of tiles. I know that it's a tile object. So therefore, it's quite safe for us to cast it, right? Casting, you guys see it a lot when you're casting to a double or like to an int, where instead of tile, you would see integer or double. This one right here, pre versus essentially if we're doing some sort of swap, right? So in this particular setup, I'm assuming that there's always 2 clicks. The first click, it's going to set prev to something. So again, the assumption for this programming, which again, it's just an example, right? So the first time you click, this will become prived. And then the second time that you click, for example, let's say we're here, what we now have are 2 objects, right? One is pointed to by prev, and then this is the current one. So we'll just call it cur. So now if our idea for the game is to swap whenever we click on 2 things, then we can do that. But essentially, this variable previous, it's pointing to null. Right, it's null if you haven't clicked anything yet, or after you click more than once. So essentially, the second time you click, that kind of resets it back to null. That's because you want to be able to click on a new pair. So again, if I click here, previous is now set to that car. Then when I click on this one, it swaps the 2, and now previous is null again. So then we can redo that process. So the set enable, so let's say you're trying to play the game and you're like, well, I want to give the user an indication that the button was clicked, or at least in this particular gameplay. As soon as you click on one, you know, disabling the button gives the impression that, oh, you should probably not pick the same button again, right? There's no logic right now preventing one from swapping with the same element. But I wanted to show you that this idea that you can enable and disable the buttons to make them look like they're enabled and disabled. But it's not until you actually program something about them being disabled that they actually respect the idea that it's a disabled object. And then there's the swap command that's called here, right? So the first click sets prev. And then the second click means user is trying to swap. And then, of course, you reset previous so that you can select a new pair after the fact. So yeah, that's that, essentially. So at this point in time, if you wanted to kind of restrict the users to certain moves, right, you could quite literally like take this and start coding checkers, for example. Or let's say that you wanted to do chess, and let's pretend that, okay, this piece you can only move 2 ahead, right? Well, in order to check that, remember that every single tile object has a row and column property. And so quite literally, you can write some piece of code within that mouse click that says, okay, check if this is a valid move. Check row. So let's say you can only move down 2 or something. So you can do something like if prev.r minus the tile. The tile is the current one, which is right here. The tile.r. So then we could say, we'll just do like a math.abs or something. So let's say we're limiting the piece from jumping more than like 2 rows or something. If this is greater than 2, then all we do is we reset prev, like prev is equal to null, return. So we can say illegal move, right? So I can just say that that's an illegal move. So I can't move more than 2 rows. So now if I click on this and I'm try to swap with this one, as you can see, nothing happens, right? However, if I click on this and this one, I can swap between those easily. But again, moving over here doesn't work. Now, what you want to do also is you want to be able to reset these back. So we want to enable the previous tile as well. So we're going to go prev.set enabled is equal to true. And I think that's about it, right? You're kind of resetting the state. So if I click on this guy and I click on the tile down here, because the difference between the rows is more than 2, nothing's going to happen. Now, let's make sure that we cannot invoke tile that set enabled because this prev is null. Set enable. Oh, sorry. So I set it to null before using it. So you probably want to set it first while it's pointing to that object, and then you can reset what previous is referencing, right? So when you do prev is equal to null, you're not killing the objects. The objects are still referred to by the 2D array, right? So they're objects and they live within their 2D array. Previous is just kind of like a reference. It's an address. It's a nickname, essentially. Sometimes it's pointing to one object. Sometimes it's pointing to another. And so when you set it to null, you're just saying stop pointing to the other object and just make it point to null. So now if we try to swap with this one, again, it's not valid, right? But you can swap between, as long as the difference between the rows is less than 2 or equal to 2. So there you go. This is kind of like how you can start adding a little bit of logic to this if you wanted to start thinking about programming chess or something, or checkers. Obviously, what you can do is, if you're doing chess, for example, you can have your group members kind of determine how to write the logic such that, okay, if it's a queen, check to see if this move is valid based on how a queen should move, how a king should move, how a bishop should move, how a checkers should move, etc. All right, so I think that's about it. Again, I'm gonna link the GitHub page. I'm gonna push this as is. Your job is to kind of watch this video, of course, and make sure you know the idea of what, how it got to be what it is, so that you can then use it for your own projects. Commit, commit to branch for mouse, click, and commit and push. I'm just showing an example of how to push through branch, since I went over branching today. Cool. On stage changes, I think we want to add that too. Add image. So remember, if you guys want to, okay, I think that's been pushed. If you want to import this as is, you can import it either, you can clone the entire project, or you can grab files specifically from the source, the SRC folder. You could literally right click on the Java files in GitHub and then download it and then just drag it into your project setup. That should be as easy as that. Thanks.